Just a second. There it is. There you are. There it is. Okay, can you see these images?
Yes.
If you can't, just come a bit closer. Now, things to consider. Children, take care of them. Whoever owns them is in charge of them.
Jake, do you hear Father? Father said you sit down and don't move.
He's quite quiet. The rest aren't really. So,
Sit down. Yes, you are quiet, but you have to sit and don't bother because Father is going to talk with us.
what I'm going to do,
He's like a
actually,
teacher.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through these photographs. That's all. I'm not going to bother you with anything deeper than that. I'll just walk you through these photographs. I'll tell you what you see. And then at the end, if you have any questions about what you've seen, or if you'd like to know more, just ask me, and maybe we'll have a conversation based on that. The obvious reason I'm here, crazy as it may seem, is to fundraise. But we are such a small kind of community. I think we should just let go of that. And at the end, if you can help, glory be to God. If you can't, glory be to God as well. I just want you to focus on the images and on this idea of having, again, an Orthodox monastery in a place where we used to have Orthodox monasteries everywhere, and where they've disappeared for over 1,000 years now. So that's all I want you to do. Just look at these and try to picture a monastery here.
Father,
Now,
I'm
yes.
sorry. Can you put a little bit of computer to the side because it's kind of like...
Is that all right?
You are in my way.
I can just move my...
Okay. So these are just, I think, one or two photographs I've taken just in front of the monastery, because I want you to have a feeling about what it feels and what it looks like over there. And I assume not many of you know where the Hebrides are, where the Scottish Islands are. If you know, I mean, most of us know that this is the UK, and Scotland is the northern side of it, up here. Well, these islands to the west of Scotland and north of Ireland are called the Hebrides. And they are split in two groups. The inner Hebrides, those which are closer to Scotland, and the outer Hebrides, which are more into the ocean. And Mull, our island, Isle of Mull, is actually part of the inner Hebrides. So we are quite up north of the UK, into the ocean. It's not as cold as you would expect. It's actually much warmer than in mainland Scotland. It's just extremely windy, lots of storms, lots of rain, and pretty much nobody else around, which is wonderful for a monastery. I'll tell you at the end. I've included one photograph just because it sounds just posh and beautiful, but in fact it's extremely problematic. The area is so secluded and so beautiful, and it's been declared an area of outstanding natural beauty, which indeed is a great thing because it preserves the area, but it also poses all sorts of problems for us because it limits very much anything that we can do there. So everything is regulated, from the sort of building you can build, how long it can be, how high, what it's made of, and so on.
How close to the Isle of Skye are you?
Very close. The Isle of Skye is part of the Hebrides itself. There are three main, in the sense of big islands in the Hebrides: Skye, Mull, and I think Lewis. So these are the biggest islands in the Hebrides. And the scenery is pretty much identical. I think Mull is a bit more fortunate because it hasn't attracted the tourists that Skye has. So it's a bit more authentic. This is our church. It's been our property since 2010. It's a donation we received from a group of Catholic monks who tried to establish a monastery there themselves, and they couldn't. So when they decided to move somewhere else, they donated the church to us. It's built in 1755. It is a Grade B historical monument, and it's built on the site of a 7th century monastery. there are documents that say that Kilninian, our church, used to belong to the monastery on Iona, which I'll mention to you a bit later. This is in front of the monastery, and you might recognize that bearded, white-bearded creature over there. That's Metropolitan Callistus, when he blessed us with his presence last year. It really was a special thing. He included the monastery in one of the pilgrimages he organized to the Hebrides. And we went to the church together, we celebrated, we blessed it. It's been a beautiful, it became already part of our history. And these are the mountains. And if you think it was cloudy yesterday, you should think twice. I want to tell you 2 words only about the 2 saints to whom our church is dedicated, Saint Ninian and Saint Cuthbert. They are both Orthodox, both living in the 1st millennium. About Saint Ninian, if you remember anything, the one thing to remember is that he is the founder of the first documented monastery in Scotland in 397. It is very possible that there are even earlier monasteries, but there's no documents or documentation about them. But even so, 397 is extremely old. I mean, this is 6 centuries before, or more, before Russia became a Christian land. And we don't have anything in Romania that compares in terms of how ancient this is.
Christendom was alive.
Christianity was there, and their monastic tradition, this is extraordinary actually, their monastic tradition is perfectly contemporary with that in Egypt. So the same century, 4th century, when the first monks and nuns started to organize in Egypt, you already have one monastery in Scotland. And I have 2 photographs of the place where Saint Ninian lived for a while. He was a bishop, but he had this calling of a hermit. And I believe, if you can see it, that is his cell over there. And this is where he would receive probably his guests or something, I don't know. There's a close-up of the entry into the cave. And the Catholic communities around do celebrate Mass once a year. And hopefully, God willing, once we are there, we can do the same. The second saint is Saint Cuthbert. Saint Cuthbert is known as the most beloved and popular saint of England. He also was a bishop, but he only served as a bishop for about, I think, 2 years and a half, 3 years. And then he went back and lived as a hermit on one of the islands in Northumbria called the Farne Island. That is the island. Before I move forward, please note these creatures at his feet. Those are otters or some sort of smaller seals. There is a beautiful story about Saint Cuthbert going out of the monastery at night time and dipping down in the North Sea all the way down to his shoulders and praying all night long. Because according to his vision of prayer, unless one faces death as one prays, then you're not really praying, you are simply pretending to pray. And those tiny animals, those otters, are still there today. There they are. Just waiting for their next, waiting for the next Cuthbert to come and either protect or eat, depends.
We were wondering how old they were. They're pretty old.
They are pretty old, yes. It's the same ones. It's exactly the same ones. I think these two, the next 2 photographs are quite important because when I say island, I've noticed that most people imagine something out of Greece, the Mediterranean Sea. And these saints become a sort of romantic figures that we don't really understand. But in fact, this is how those islands look like. So this is where they lived.
Not a beach.
They must have been very tough men who really either went for Christ or death. I mean, there's nothing there. There's not one single tree on the whole island. And Saint Cuthbert is said to have lived there for a few years, and then he felt that the waves of the sea distracted him from prayer. So he built a wall all around. And then eventually he felt that the sky and the birds distracted him from prayer. So he covered himself up. And I think he is the only example we have in Christianity of a hermit and a recluse at the same time. I can't think of anyone else. This is another photograph from the Farne Islands. And now I just want to show you a bit more of the heritage. I mean, rather than focusing on Mull, I want you to understand that this whole area of the Hebrides, and that actually it's Scotland itself, but the Hebrides mostly, have an entire tradition of monastic presence. It's not just that on Iona there happened to be one monastery, or on Mull. There were tens of monasteries, and thousands of monastics, male and female, lived there along the centuries. If you are to just list all the saints that the Hebrides gave us, or that the Celtic tradition gave us, you could probably just fill up a whole calendar just with those. And it's rather painful to me today to see that almost no one knows of their existence. People in England, in all honesty, don't really care anymore, because that's lost. And people outside England simply don't know. Simply don't know. When you visit, for instance, Farne Island, St. Cuthbert's Island, that I've just shown you, the guides might mention Cuthbert once in a 2-hour-long visit to the island. Everything else is about the geography or the birds or the vegetation. Iona, by far the most famous and better known place in the Hebrides is Iona, and that is because of Saint Columba. Saint Columba left Ireland and moved to Iona, where he established a monastery in the 6th century. When you go to Iona, to me this is the heart of it all. Not the abbey, not the nunnery, but the bay where Saint Columba landed, coming from Ireland. He left Ireland with the only aim of finding a place where he could no longer see his home. Because they had this belief, the Celts, that, and it goes all the way back to St. Paul, that a Christian's home is not here. A Christian's home is always in the kingdom. And you could live in an environment or in a place until you felt like you are growing roots and that you started to depend on the environment. And that was the moment when you had to leave it and move forward. And he stopped on various islands going north from Ireland. And when he came to Iona, you can see that tiny little hill there. It's called the Hill of the Turning Back to Ireland. Because that's where he climbed. He looked back, and on a clear day he could no longer see his old home, Ireland. So they settled. And they settled and they created a monastery. This is the abbey on Iona you are going to see today. Of course, this abbey doesn't go back to the 6th century when St. Columba was there. It was built in the 14th century as a Benedictine monastery. There is no monastic living there today, male or female. It is, I think it's owned by the National Trust, and it is run by the community of Iona, a group of lay Christians who take care, actually very good care of the place. But there is no monk or nun living in the abbey. And you could see, just so you have an idea of the geography, so the abbey is on the island of Iona. That island over there is Mull. That's ours. So it's that close to Iona. And just across from the abbey, where you can see the graveyard, there is another wonderful, tiny little chapel dedicated to St. Oran. And I think in many ways this is much closer to the original buildings they would have had in the Celtic times. St. Oran is one of the original companions that came to Iona with St. Columba. And he was the first one to die and be buried on Iona. That's why the cemetery and the chapel is dedicated to him.
Are there people living there?
Yes, on Iona, I believe there are about 100 plus minus a few people. There are, I wouldn't call them villages. So the ferry takes you into the village, which has probably about 30 houses. And the village is on the east side of Iona. If you cross Iona all the way to the west side, there are 4, maybe 5 other farmhouses. So that's all there is. Mull is one of the most populated islands. Officially there are about 2,000 people living there, but in practice, if you go winter time, I don't think there are more than 600. Many of the houses are owned by people who don't live there all year through. Summer houses probably, yeah. Or they own them and they administer them as a business, bed and breakfast, yeah.
Aren't they mostly on the east coast and you're,
Most of the population lives on the east coast.
and you're on the west?
Because on not only of Mull, but of all the islands, most of them live on the eastern side. Because that's, see, if this is an island, you've got, this is the west side, this is the east side, and in between you've got a mountain or a hill. So all the storms hit on the west side, where we are, where the monastery is, but all the same people live on the east side. So most of the population is there. But monks, obviously,
So is that like a
want
test
it
of
to
faith?
be, yeah, I mean, as a monastic, I suppose you value being alone and peaceful more than being necessarily dry. You can get dry in front of a fire.
Father, how far is the distance between Iona and Mull?
About 10 minutes by ferry and about 30, 40 minutes, 30 I would say, probably by boat.
How many kilometers?
I have no idea. No idea. As I've told you, this is Iona and that is Mull, it's that close. You can swim if you would like to. They do have
I was
killer
thinking
whales.
you could.
They do have killer whales and all sorts of sharks. But be my guest.
Then you can really pray.
Yeah, I've got other ways of doing that. That hill in front of the abbey is quite important because that is where St. Columba's cell used to be. And they've done excavations recently, and they have indeed found a round type of structure, a foundation that fits the beehive cells of the Irish monks. And I think the last thing you should know about Iona, if you ever go there, are these high crosses or the tall crosses. This one is called St. Martin's. The one I have wearing is a copy of St. John's Cross, also one of those high crosses. In the 9th century, so 800s, there were over 300 on Iona. And today, St. Martin's is the only one that is still standing. Most of them have been ruined by the Viking attacks. Others have been ruined by the Reformation and the complete abandonment that followed the Reformation. You can't really see it. Well, actually you could in theory. But I wanted to point out that although these are, 8th century, 9th century crosses, they are covered in iconography. So at the very center of it, there's a beautifully sculpted icon of the Mother of God carrying Christ. And then on the lower levels, you've got icons of David, the prophet, and Daniel, the prophet, and all sorts of other images. Now, the next island is dedicated to Saint Brendan, because Saint Brendan built a monastery there, actually before Saint Columba even arrived to the Hebrides. And this is a photograph of that island. To answer your previous questions about how many people live there, on this particular island, none. It is uninhabited, and it has been uninhabited for about 400, 450 years. So in many ways, I believe that's why these ruins that go back to the 6th, 7th century are so perfectly preserved, because there's nobody around to mess up with them and ruin them. Nature takes good care of them. You can still see this is the original chapel, and these are the auxiliary buildings. This, by tradition, is the tomb on the grave of St. Columba's mother. Apparently St. Columba and St. Brendan did meet, and his mother is buried there. This is a bit, more clear. And these are, I haven't seen any other in the Hebrides, some of the best preserved beehive cells I have ever seen. This is a double one, which makes it even more extraordinary. Apparently, if it's a double beehive cell, it must have belonged to either the abbot of the monastery or the priest, if the abbot was not the priest, because he needed his own private space as a shelter, but also a second space where he could guide people or receive confessions and things like that. Most of the times you will see them either in Scotland or especially in Ireland as just one cell in every place. And this is where they are located in terms of on the island. It doesn't make much sense, I was telling people yesterday, because they are so close to the shore that you get hit by everything that comes from the ocean. But it makes sense if you think about the way they're related to nature. The Celts were not big fans of inside spaces. They were not meant for us. We were not meant to live our lives within walls, enclosed in something. We are part of God's creation, and we belong outside. Now, that being said, of course, when a storm hits, you need shelter. So you do need a cell. We'll build them very small, very uncomfortable, and as close to nature as possible. Yeah.
Which is St. Brennan's Isle, the one that's close or the one that's...
This one I'm just showing you now.
Yeah. Well, what
Which
was
is
the one that
about,
was just
and
after?
this one is about, again, I can tell you how much it takes you to get there. I have no idea in kilometers or miles. It took us about 55 minutes with a motorboat to get there. So probably by sailing 3 hours and a half, 4 hours, I'd say. And this is south of Mull and Iona.
Okay.
The following group of isles, I've taken just 2 or 3 photographs because, to be honest, it's the only island where I found proper birds and flowers, and I wanted you to know that actually it is a beautiful place. It's not all grumpy and sad. So the Treshnish Isles is where the colony of puffins are located, and all the tourists that come to the Hebrides come there for the puffins, not the saints. I actually dislike them for that. I think that they are distracting the pilgrims. But they are beautiful birds. So if you go to the Hebrides, you should go between, I think, mid-June to mid-August, so that you can have a chance and see them as well. This is Langa on the Treshnish Islands. This is my absolute favorite island, the island of St. Kenneth, and it's called Inch Kenneth, which is very close to Mull. This is Inch Kenneth, and the island you see behind is Mull, our island. It's my absolute favorite because this is where I found caves. The sort of caves you still find in Moldavia, where hermits live. The sort of caves you still find on Athos, on the Holy Mountain, where again hermits still live. You just have to, you know, the Celtic crosses are everywhere. The old monastery was located. But as you walk along the coast, you see these things. And if you've seen them once, you can recognize them. These are cells where a human hand has tried to build something at the entrance as a sort of shelter against the winds and the storms coming from the ocean. And they are very, very close to the ocean. This is taken from the inside one of these cells. And in all honesty, unless you've once in your lifetime said your morning prayers, looking outside and seeing the sun coming out, it just changed my prayer entirely. And I think, yes, back to our island on Mull. I want to go back to Mull because in some ways this will justify why I want to build a women's monastery, not a man's monastery. Because on Mull, you will find this, the nun's cave. You kept hearing me about monks and hermits and so on, and most of them were male, but the women were just as dedicated. This is a cave on Mull. It's quite difficult to get there. When we had our last pilgrimage this August, end of August, beginning of September, only about half of us got there. It's along the coast. You have to go, you have to time it very carefully because the tide can actually get you trapped in there, and it's quite a long way to go. It's not an easy hike, and it's been inhabited by women hermits in the first millennium. It was abandoned after the Vikings attacked the islands, and then it was used once again after the Reformation, when the nuns on Iona and Mull had to find a place to hide. So they went back to this cave and lived in it probably until they died out. This is the entry. It's quite big. It's actually quite big. It's surprisingly big. You can fit 40 people in there easily. And you can still find, among the graffiti and everything that our modern world has brought in, you can still find the ancient crosses carved in the walls of the cave. It's a beautiful place to pray, and again, it's just on the coast. Just on the coast. These are the Celtic arches, which are about 20 minutes away from the cave. And I think this is
when the tide rises,
when the tide rises, it goes all the way up here. So these actually get covered.
not into the cave.
Not in the cave. No, not in. But I assume if a particularly bad storm hits, you would need that sheltering that they've done. Now, just a few words before I end. This idea of a new monastery in the Hebrides is not new at all. And the best known person who's tried to establish a monastery there has been Metropolitan Callistus. I'm not sure, but I think about 15 years ago, he established a foundation, a charity called the Orthodox Friends of Iona. And the purpose of that was to raise the funds to buy some sort of house, either on Iona or on Mull or somewhere in the Hebrides, to just establish a monastery. They haven't, unfortunately, had much success, but they've done other wonderful things in the meantime. For instance, they've started a tradition of Orthodox pilgrimages to the Hebrides. And my first pilgrimage was last year in 2014 with them, and I've just taken note of what they were doing, and I'm basically doing the same thing myself now. The other person who's been a wonderful supporter is Father Andrew Louth, who's in this photograph there in Durham, who has accepted also to be one of our founding trustees managing the monastery. Oh yeah, these are photographs from last summer when Metropolitan Callistus came and prayed in the church with us. And to be honest, this is the map of what's going to happen there, if you can follow me. So this is the church there, and this is an ancient cemetery around the church, and the cemetery belongs to the local council. So we know for sure nothing will be built there, nothing will happen to that land, because cemeteries, graveyards are not affected by this. This is the road, and this is the ocean. And this land is the land, 5 acres of land we've acquired. The location of the future monastic building will be here somewhere. So far, we've done quite well, glory be to God. We have the church, which is an extraordinary gift. We've got the money to buy the land, that's done. I'm now fundraising for the last two things. We must repair the roof of Kilninian, because again, the church was built in 1755, and I doubt anybody at any time has done anything to repair it. And it's especially the woodwork, the timbers, that is affected by woodworms along the centuries. And then also I'm fundraising to build the monastic house, which will be a simple one-level wooden house. It's by choice, made very simple and of wood, so it's as cheap as possible, and also because they wouldn't allow us to build anything bigger anyway, being so restricted in terms of building. And I think this is the last. Yes, if you can help, please help. If you know friends who can help, please help. I've given all of you a brochure in church, and on that brochure you'll find the same information here. In the United States we have a monastery in Colorado called Protection Monastery, and they are our sister monastery, and they accept checks on our behalf. So if you want to write a check, you can do it and send it there, or you can do it now and give it to me. Or if you prefer, you can make a donation via PayPal on the monastery website. So this is pretty much the introduction I wanted to give to you.
What do you mean by our position? You communicated that monastery in Colorado is in
As our sister monastery.
our system.
Yes.
What do you mean by
No,
that?
sister. Sister, not system.
Sister.
Sister, yes.
Oh.
Yes,
I-
yeah. No,
I
no, no,
thought
no.
maybe it was like in the Roman churches.
No, no, no. It's just, it's a tradition in the Orthodox countries to have various monasteries that join together to simply support themselves. Sister. All right.
Father, didn't you leave something out that they do on the eastern coast of Mull that's pretty unique?
I would rather, it's not unique in any way, and I don't make much of it because it's got very little to do with our monastic aim. But on the east coast of Mull, in Tobermory, our capital, there is one of the biggest whiskey distilleries in the Netherlands.
Good place for single malt scotch, right?
Yes, single malt scotch. And they also make wonderful cheese out of malt cheese.
What kind of
So,
cheese?
yeah.
Malt scotch.
It's quite fragrant. And yeah, it's made, it's made of, I think it's a combination of sheep and cow. I don't really know.
No goat.
I like it. I actually like it. I don't know about the whiskey, so I don't reckon, I have no idea. But the cheese is very good.
Are you going to have something to worry about in the store?
It's not that cold. It's not that cold, and it's not, yeah. All right, well, if you don't have any other questions, thank you for having me. Thank you, Father, because without your blessing, I couldn't have come. Please pass my gratitude to His Eminence as well. And where's Cuthbert? And thank you, Cuthbert, because he's the little, you know what, who's nagged me until I said yes, I would be coming. And I'm very happy I did. I'm very happy I did.
We are too.
We are happy to have you here.
Be a bit, just be courageous. There's just a few of you. It's a handful of you. Be courageous. It doesn't matter that there aren't hundreds of you. I'm alone. And if God wants something to happen, it will happen, both here and in my monastery. Just be courageous and try. It's not about getting out in the streets and telling people repent or God knows what. It's about each and every one of us remembering that we are called to be holy. We are called to be holy, not somebody else, somewhere else. I'm called to be a saint, and you, and you, and you, with families, and we are called to be saints. And if we keep that in mind, and if we do everything in our power, things will happen. Things always happen. Don't get discouraged. Don't feel you're abandoned. So what if it's just a few of you? You can change everything and everyone around you. Just, I wanted to give you that, if nothing else. Have faith, because it's not you working, it's Christ working. And when the time will come, His work will be done. Forgive me and thank you. Thank you for welcoming.
You have to tell me something. I've never been to check out www.
That's not what you're supposed to